Hello again. My name's Adam. I lead musical walking tours for the famous London Walks company in London. And this is my back pages, the musical book vlog. In this episode, I'm sending you off the beaten track. You're going to have to do a bit of digging in this episode. I'm sending you to the four corners of eBay and your local second-hand bookshop. We're going back in time to the year 1973 in search of the story of pop. The story of pop was originally published in the early 1970s in weekly parts, 26 weekly parts. The idea was that you bought the magazine every week, you saved up for the binder, you sent away for the binder, and it built into a set of encyclopedias. It meant that you spent an inordinate amount of money on a couple of books, but for many of us it was well worth it. The publication was so successful indeed that it doubled in size. The initial print run was for 26 weekly parts. It eventually expanded to 52 weekly parts, numbering 4 volumes in total. It's a real journey back into the past, personally for me, because this is where I come in. My older brother purchased these, so they were around the house, and I started reading them when I was about 6 or 7. So this is where it all begins for me. It's a sentimental journey. The original idea behind the story of pop was to compile a definitive encyclopedia of post-Elvis pop music. These days, it's no such thing as definitive, of course. Time moved on. There are no references, this being the early 1970s, there are no references to punk rock, there are no references to hip-hop. So, without such details, this book can't be in any way described as definitive these days, but it still has a number of great strengths, and I still come back to it from time to time to check a few details. The period in which it was written was a necessary pause for breath. It's around 1973. We are emerging from the incredible hangover of the Beatles. The pop charts are dominated by lots of fun pop music. We've got Suzi Quatro, we've got Mud, 50s influenced bubblegum pop, if you like. So 1973 is a pause. 1973, 1974, a pause to go back, to move forward. It's a breath. It's a reflective time. We're looking back at the Beatles and maybe we're saying, you know, did that really happen? Could such a thing have really taken place? A seismic event. They not only tore up the rule book, the Beatles, but they made the rules by which generations of rock and roll bands would live thereafter. So it's a pause for reflection, and it's the ideal time to compile the first history of post-Elvis pop. The story of pop has 2 great aspects to recommend it. Its big strength is in history. It's in the story of pop where I first read about jazz, about minstrelsy, about the blues, about country, about bluegrass. All the roots musics all the parent musics of rock and roll are dissected in a series of revealing and edifying essays. So, personally, this is when I come in learning about the history of pop. In a similar way, it's also very strong on the sociological aspects of our music. It looks particularly at musical tribes in a very serious way. Perhaps that was done for the first time, looking at pop culture, looking at mods and rockers and looking at skinhead culture, which was comparatively new at the time. So its great strengths can be found in the history of the deep history of rock and roll music, and in the tribal aspects of the fans of the music. You are going to have to do a bit of rummaging for this one, but you know, nothing better than rummaging around your local second-hand bookstore. Dig around on eBay, see if you can find this. If you're looking for an introduction to the musics that make up the music that we know as rock and roll today, this is a great starting point. As I said earlier on, it's a sentimental journey, this one, because this is where I come in. This is where I first read about the history of pop music, and I went on, of course, to play music, to write about music, and to lead musical walking tours. So now it's all this. It all begins for me with the story of pop. Now, this being a book vlog inspired by a walking tour, I like to point you towards a location mentioned in the book that we're discussing. And in this one, I've been inspired by this essay here on the Stones' famous drugs bust of '67, the Redlands drugs bust. I've been inspired to send you in search of Wormwood Scrubs in West London. The closest tube station to Wormwood Scrubs prison is East Acton. So that's the best way to get there. There are a number of other ways that you can get to Wormwood Scrubs, and I wouldn't recommend any of them. We're sending you there in a musical context because Keith Richards spent the night there in '67 following the drugs bust. Gary Moore, the great blues guitarist, his album Back on the Streets, he posed for the sleeve outside that famous prison. Pete Doherty from the Libertines spent some time in the Scrubs as well, and it's mentioned, it's name-checked in the Jams single Down in the Tube Station at Midnight. They smelled of pubs and Wormwood Scrubs and too many right-wing meetings, is Paul Weller's famous lyric. So Wormwood Scrubs is the place for you. That's the destination I'm choosing in this episode of My Back Pages. Do remember you can keep in touch. The Rock and Roll Librarian is keen to hear from you. Give me your recommendations. Follow me on Twitter. Join me on a musical walking tour. And come back next time for the next episode of My Back Pages.